For years, the thought that I should read more books was constantly on my mind. It seems like one of the things we all know we should be doing, and which we're told constantly by famous smart people and productivity YouTubers that we should be doing if we want to better ourselves. Time and time again, I would think, today's the day, I'm going to choose a book and start reading it. But inevitably, I would get bogged down trying to figure out when to read, or make excuses like, I don't have a book at home to read, and I prefer reading paperback anyways, so I'll go to the bookstore tomorrow or order a book online later. And then there's the issue of what to read, because let's be real, with a time investment like that, you want to know a book is worth reading before you read it. And that's a problem that the sponsor of this video, Shortform, really helps to solve, but more on them later. Anyways, after that whole process and the frustration it entailed, I would almost inevitably end up choosing something with far less resistance, like scrolling on my phone or watching a YouTube video.
Despite the fact that Lloyd and I both loved reading for leisure when we were growing up, we gradually lost the habit after we started law school. Suddenly, we were constantly being required to read huge amounts, whether it was lengthy textbooks or long cases from over 100 years ago. As a result, our idea of relaxing no longer became, well, reading even more. Things didn't change after we started working either, because now we were being required to review thousands of pages of documents as part of our day-to-day jobs. At the same time though, it did feel like a little something was missing without reading regularly in our personal lives. After all, books are a great medium for a ton of things, from learning new information to stimulating imagination and creativity, and we could kind of feel ourselves stagnating mentally when we weren't reading for ourselves. Over the last few years, we've managed to reincorporate reading back into our lives, which you might have seen through some of our YouTube videos, and today we want to share with you guys how we did that. Our first tip is to buy a Kindle or other comparable e-reader to use for reading. To be honest, this was a hard one for both of us to do initially because we both really like reading physical books. There's something almost romantic about flipping through physical pages in a book and holding it in your hands as you go through it. The issue is, going to a bookstore or ordering books online requires preparation in advance, and that's not really possible to have a book ready to read at any given time unless you've already gone out ahead of time and bought the book or ordered it. The main benefit of using an e-reader is that you're pretty much able to access books anywhere and at any time. So if you're in the mood to read something, there's almost no time delay in getting the book, and there's also minimal friction which could prevent you from doing so. Plus, e-readers are incredibly portable and easy to use. As much as we might love physical books, there's no denying that they get kind of cumbersome and bulky to carry around. On top of that, if you're on the go and reading while commuting or going on holiday, it's super nice to have a variety of books ready at your fingertips.
Since we live in Hong Kong where homes are quite small, space is also an issue. If we bought physical copies of every single book we read, it would eat into our available space in a really big way. This is actually something we experienced a number of times, and we ended up having to go through our book collection to figure out which books we were okay to donate. Over time, to solve this issue, we ended up moving to using an e-reader most of the time. That said, we do love physical books, so we usually end up buying copies of books that we really love. Usually these are books that we find really gorgeous to look at, or ones that we go back and read often, or honestly just ones that we have a sentimental connection to for some reason. But aside from this, using an e-reader definitely does simplify the process for us a lot and does allow us to save space in our home. It's also worth mentioning that if you have an iPad or other tablet device, it is possible for you to download the Kindle or other book reader app and just download books on there. But the downside of this is that tablet devices tend to emit a lot of blue light similar to computer or phone screens. In our experience, e-readers are a lot easier on the eyes and look and feel a lot more analog like books compared to a tablet.
The second thing we did to implement a more consistent reading habit was to be more deliberate about what books to read. As we get older, we get more responsibilities and we become busier and busier, and technology is always presenting new and novel ways for us to distract ourselves. As a result, it can often feel like the opportunity cost associated with reading a book that ends up not being very good or not what you were looking for is pretty high. To deal with this, we've worked out a few ways to vet books in advance before actually reading them. The first thing we do is look at book summaries on apps such as Shortform, who are kindly sponsoring this video. This is a strategy we use for nonfiction books, whether they're about building habits, health and nutrition, or productivity, because Shortform has a huge catalog of summaries for nonfiction books. From our time using the app, we found that these provide a great rundown of all the main ideas in a book through a high-level one-page summary of the entire book, as well as more detailed summaries of each chapter. So usually, if we're trying to decide whether or not we want to read a book, we'll check out Shortform's one-page summary as well as possibly the summaries of any chapters that interest us, and we can decide based off of that whether or not we want to actually commit to reading the book. Shortform summaries also conveniently refer to concepts in other similar books, which is how I actually found the book summary I'm currently reading on understanding and avoiding distractions. So if we really liked a book we've read, we'll sometimes go back and look at similar books referenced in a summary to see if we want to do further reading on whatever topic it is we're looking into. If you're interested in trying short form out, we have a code down in the description below which you can use for a 5-day free trial and 20% off an annual subscription. Thanks so much to Shortform for sponsoring this video.
The other thing we do to help us make choices is to use other forms of media that we consume as a guiding light of sorts. As an example, one of the things that actually got me back into reading was listening to podcasts on health, fitness, and nutrition. Whenever I listened to a podcast guest that I thought was really informative or had points that I thought were interesting, I would look and see if they published any books in the past, since a book was a medium for them to be able to express their ideas in a more fully fleshed out way. This helped me find books that I really enjoyed reading and which gave me insights into areas that I was very interested in. This kind of made me realize that while podcasts are great for getting general information across, a book is truly a way for an author to really express and fully form all of their opinions and views in a coherent manner. The other benefit of this is because I've listened to the person speak on the podcast already, I kind of already know that I'm gonna like the subject matter they're talking about, and so committing to the book is a lot easier. It's also worth mentioning that even if these people hadn't written books in the past, if they had online publications like blogs, that was also a great way to implement some reading and do a deeper dive into whatever it is they were talking about. This isn't limited to podcasts only either. We've both read books after watching movie adaptations of said books, which were done really well, since we already knew we liked the story and wanted to relive the experience in greater detail. Generally speaking, like with my podcast example, books are really good at being able to fully flesh out information and create immersive worlds. So if we really like anything that links back to a book, we always consider reading that book just to try and get more out of whatever it is that captured our interest in the first place.
The third thing we did was deliberately setting aside time to read and building that into our daily routines. As we mentioned earlier, up until a few years ago, we both weren't doing that much reading outside of anything related to school or work, even though we were both well aware that it was, good to read more. But as we got busier, especially after we started working, we viewed reading as something we do more of when we had time. The problem with taking that approach, though, was that realistically, without being specific and intentional about when we would actually make time to read, it wasn't that likely we would do it, especially on a regular basis. The other issue was that when we did read, it wasn't very consistent either because we treated it more like an occasion. Like, this Sunday afternoon, I'm going to go to a coffee shop and read, rather than something that formed part of our usual routine. But approaching reading this way created too much friction because it required us to step outside of our routine in order to read, and that made it much harder to do regularly.
Instead, we found times in our daily routines where we could more easily integrate a reading habit, which, if you've watched our evening routine video, is ordinarily before we go to bed. This is a great way to wind down before sleep, which is something that we really try to do before we go to bed every single night. But at the same time, it really helped us keep off of our backlit screens like our phones and video game consoles right before bed. This meant that reading slotted in really well with our evening routine right before bed, and because we put our phones outside of the bedroom when we go to sleep, it made it really easy in the sense that we didn't have any distractions around us when we were trying to read. Now, of course, a reading habit doesn't have to take place right before bed, and circumstances will vary from person to person. For others, the most convenient time to read could be in the morning when you're having your morning coffee, or even during the commute to work. It's worth mentioning that one might think that slotting reading into these small pockets of time into a daily routine may not be very substantial. But developing a reading habit, like any other habit, is a lot easier if you start small and just keep it consistent and make sure that you find a time which is convenient to get it in every single day. It may seem really appealing, especially if one's feeling motivated, to try and set a really big and at times outlandish goal, like trying to read 2 books a week or trying to read for 2 hours 4 times a week, even if someone's starting from a point of not reading at all. But practically speaking, and in our experience, it's really hard for these habits to stick, and the most important thing is to maintain some level of consistency rather than intensity. Because it's harder to find that amount of time and honestly that amount of motivation on a regular basis, it's a lot easier to just try to keep a consistent habit even if it's not that intense. So in our experience, if you want to develop a reading habit, it's much easier to start with a more achievable goal, like trying to read 5 pages a day or 10 minutes a day at a time that really suits you in your schedule. It's much easier to do that and increase the intensity of the reading, if you so desire, after the habit is already formed. As we mentioned, reading regularly is a habit like any other, and consistency really is key in getting that habit to stick. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Check out this video for our evening routine when I was still working as a lawyer, and check out this video for a video that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll like.